you've seen a table on the right side as you exiting the social hall. On the right side, there is a table very cozily tucked. And on that table is just a fragment of Rabbi Sandy Sasso's books. And they are, I think you said 24, 25 already.
There are 25 children's books and 2 for adults.
So let me just, Sandy Eisenberg Sasso, Midrash, reading the Bible with question marks, definitely to have. And so I would like to read small bio from the back. Sandy Eisenberg Sasso is the best-selling author in God's Name, God's Paintbrush, and Butterflies Under Our Hats. More than 500,000 copies of her books are in print around the world. She was the first woman ordained from Reconstructionist Rabbinical College in Philadelphia in 1974 and earned her doctoral of ministry degree from Christian Theological Seminary. The recipient of many awards, Rabbi Sandy has recently retired from a full-time rabbinate and now directs a program in religion and arts at Butler University in Indianapolis, Indiana. So, and I barely scratched the surface of accomplishments, so there's more to say, but I think the real substance is in teaching and learning. So thank you for returning from your scrumptious meal, and we're ready to learn.
Well, thank you, Tina. And I really have to take a moment to thank Tina for the beautiful words that she said at Shabbat services about both Dennis and me. You know, when people come to you and say maybe they'd like to be a rabbi, you have to decide whether that person, you know, that would be a good fit for that person. And when Tina came to me, I knew immediately it would be a good fit, because it's not just that she had a good mind and could do the studies, which are rigorous, but she had an expansive soul, and that's what it takes to be a great rabbi. So I'm so glad that so glad you came to Indianapolis. And I'm glad you're leading a Reconstructionist congregation. I have to say, you know, both Dennis and I looked at each other after the service and said, wow, this is really a great Reconstructionist congregation. It reminds us of those early years when we would visit congregations as students and we'd go to convention, everybody's singing and harmonizing, and you know what's going on. It's just beautiful. You should congratulate yourselves, okay? Because we were very touched. So actually, I'll just add something to what Tina said that explains how I got into the work that we're going to do today. When I decided I wanted to retire a little bit earlier from the congregation after 36 years, but I knew I wanted to explore my writing side, do some more writing, and my creative side. And I said, well, what do I love the most, and how can I make that happen? And I said, well, I love the study of religion, obviously, and I love the arts. And so I created a program called Religion, Spirituality, and the Arts. It is now at Indiana University in the urban campus at the Heron Art School there. It's finished 10 years. I have retired from that too, but I'm still writing. And the idea was to bring together professional artists, 12 professional artists, in a seminar to study a biblical text through the eyes of religious interpretation, music, visual art, and literature and poetry. And we had faculty in all of those disciplines. So I would have a music historian, an art historian, you know, a poet. I often did the religion. And we would do it throughout the year. And at the end of the year, everybody would have to create something. And we would put on a major performance and exhibition. It has been just an enriching experience for me, deeply so. And what I often teach, when I usually do the first session, is the Midrash. You're also knowledgeable. I'm not sure I need to explain what Midrash is, but very briefly. Okay. So, of course, look, after the biblical after the biblical period is completed, there is an interpretive tradition that develops, and one of the methods of interpreting biblical texts is called midrash. It comes from the word that means to search or seek out. So you're going to search the text and see things like something's missing, something's confusing, something bothers me, and then you're going to read. So the rabbis who created this literature are going to read their own life experiences back into the text as they retell stories. So, I mean, a good example of this, because you all know this, what was the tree of the knowledge of good and evil? What was the fruit of the tree? Ah, yes, you think so. No, that came later. There's doesn't say what the fruit of the tree is in the tree of knowledge of good and evil. But actually the apple came from Latin, and that was in the Septuagint, they said it was an apple. But the rabbis said, apples in the Middle East? Are you kidding me? So they said, oh, I think it was a fig. Why do the rabbis think it's in the Midrash? Why was it a fig? Well, guess what? Why do you think the rabbis picked the fig? The fig leaf. So the fig leaf was kind enough to cover their nakedness because after all, it was the fruit that caused them to sin. So you have this is what Midrash does. It fills in these spaces. There are two types of collections of Midrash. One is Midrash Halacha, which is Midrash on law and gives you understandings of the halacha, the legal tradition, and which I don't pay much attention to, sorry to say, but the other is Midrash Agadah, which is narrative Midrash, okay? It is the imagination of the rabbis. There are classical bodies of Midrash. You can get them. You probably can get them on the internet now, but you can buy them in stores, beautiful collections of Midrashim. An old one was Louis Ginsburg's Legends of the Jews, and there's one by Bialik that collects Midrashim. And what happened after the classical flourishing Midrash, that process continued. And as women became to take on scholarly roles and Jewish leadership roles, they also added to Midrash because they said what's missing a lot is there are no women, or the woman's story isn't told. You know, who is the subject of the story? So you see Midrash flourishing. I'll leave it at that unless there are any questions. So now I want to show you what happened. Tell them about the.
Said the apple, and you said that was wrong.
Yeah.
Did the apple get into the tree?
Is this a joke? I said Latin because the word malum. Oh, sorry, I missed that. What? I'm so used to him punning that I was sure he was going to tell me to. Yeah, the word in Latin is malum, and that means apple, and that also means evil. Malum. So that's how that got. It had nothing to do with the rabbis. The rabbi says, they didn't know from apples in the Middle East, Anyway. Okay, so here is a story that we usually don't pay much attention to, but I find it totally fascinating. So we have to start by reading the text, okay? And then we're going to ask certain questions of the text. And please, this is meant to be like a participatory study session, so we'll go. Would someone like to just begin, read this, put us all on the same page? While you're reading it, keep in mind these questions. What is missing? What don't you know that you would like to know to complete the story? And is there anything troubling you by what the story says? Like you're going, I don't know, this is ethical to me, I don't get it. Okay? Anybody want to begin reading? Or, yes, please.
The angel said to Lot, whom else have you
Oh, have you here? I'm sorry for a minute.
1 sec.
Yeah.
Hand her the mic so that people on Zoom.
Oh, yes, I'm so sorry. Okay, we're at the point of their angels are coming to Sodom and Gomorrah to warn Lot and his family that the cities are going to be destroyed. Okay, and so they are now giving this message from God to Lot and his family, saying, you better get out of here. So this is where we are.
Is that working? Sons-in-law, your sons and daughters, or anyone else that you have in the city, bring them out of this place. For we are about to destroy this place because of the great outcry against before the Lord has become so great that the Lord has sent us to destroy it. So Lot went out and spoke to his sons-in-law who had married his daughters and said, "Up, get out of this place, for the Lord is about to destroy this city." But he seemed to his sons-in-law as one who jests. As dawn broke, the angels urged Lot on, saying, "Up, take your wife and your 2 remaining daughters, lest you be swept away because of the iniquity of the city." But still he delayed. So the men seized his hand and the hands of his wife and his 2 daughters, and brought them outside, and one said, "Flee for your life. Do not look behind you, nor stop anywhere in the plain. Flee to the hills, lest you be swept away." As the sun rose upon the earth and Lot entered Zoar, the Lord rained upon Sodom and Gomorrah sulfurous fire from the Lord out of heaven. He annihilated those cities and the entire plain and all the inhabitants of the cities and the vegetation of the ground. Lot's wife looked back and thereupon turned into a pillar of salt. The next morning, Abraham hurried to the place where he had stood before the Lord, and looking down toward Sodom and Gomorrah and all of the land of the plain, he saw the smoke of the land rising like the smoke of a kiln. Thus it was that when God destroyed the cities of the plain and annihilated the cities where Lot dwelt, God was mindful of Abraham and removed Lot from the midst of the upheaval.
Okay, it goes on. We'll look at the rest of the story. But how about those 2 questions? What's missing, and is anything troubling? Obviously, by asking if it's troubling, something should be troubling you. Yes.
What's troubling is that Lot's wife is punished.
Do you think? I mean, it seems that way, and that's how we've been told the story, right?
We don't know do we know anything after she becomes a pillar of salt?
Well, we know what happens to Lot and his daughters, but we don't want to get there yet. But, okay, it sounds, the way I have always read this story until I read it carefully, you're absolutely right, is that God punished Lot's wife, right? But read it really carefully. It says, Lot's wife turned back and thereupon turned into a pillar of salt. It doesn't say God turned her into a pillar of salt. So the question is it a punishment? Or in looking back upon the destruction of the 2 cities, she can no longer go on. And I will suggest that the pillar of salt is her tears. Okay, and we'll look at that a little bit more. Meaning, read earlier on, "Up, take your wife and your 2 remaining daughters." Meaning what? There were 2 daughters still in the city. I don't know about you, but if we're escaping some cataclysm and I've got 2 kids in the city, I might turn around, even though they told me not to. So that's the question. Is she punished? She has been a symbol of disobedience. You're absolutely right. That's how we have interpreted it. Bad wife, cannot pay attention, cannot listen even to God, and therefore, because she's disobedient, she's going to be turned to a pillar of salt. And if you go to the area around the Dead Sea, you will see many pillars of salt, and 1 or 2 of them will be designated by your guide as "there's Lot's wife." In fact, I have a postcard from the Dead Sea when I was younger, and on the front is one of the pillars of salt, and on the back it says Lot's wife. I said, for all eternity, she stands as a symbol of women's disobedience. I hated that story. And so now I'm going to question that. God didn't turn her to a pillar of salt. She, in seeing what she saw, turned into a pillar of salt. Okay, so that's one part. Yes, over there. Oh, yes, please, you need to use the microphone, I'm sorry.
They're angels. The angels you think would know. Why do they ask the question? Oh, sorry. Why?
Yes.
Why do they ask the question? All this kind of like, who do you have here? The sons, daughters. Why didn't they say,
know.
look, we're sent by God, or don't even say you're sent. We're angel. This city is going to be destroyed. Go and take whoever you love and get him out. So why all this?
An interesting question. I don't know. Maybe to call attention to the fact that we're going to save anyone in your family. We're not going to save anybody else, but we're going to save your family. Why? Not because of your merit, but look at the end, because Abraham's such a good guy. Huh? No, but because of the merit of Abraham, we're going to save Lot, and who was Abraham's nephew. Yes, okay. I thought I said that. Okay. Okay, another question. Yes.
I'm your mic monitor.
Okay, thank you so much.
Appreciate it.
So my question is, even if we grant that she turns into salt out of her own sadness, why is she commanded not to look back? Why is it, what's wrong or sinful or whatever about looking back? And particularly because Abraham sort of takes a peek the next day. Okay, it's not during the actual thing, but why are they commanded not to look back?
Yeah, why? I mean, that's a question you would ask, and the rabbis might ask, in order to figure out why the commandment. I mean, I have thoughts on that, but yeah, but what I want to say is, you made the point that I had noticed originally when I read this story. Abraham looks, right? Okay, he's not exactly there. He's a little bit distant, but he looks, and it's fine. So how come they couldn't look? Are they too close? Is it too tragic? You know this film that came out, Screams of Silence, and what happened in the kibbutzim in Israel? It always has a warning. You may not want, this is a devastating film. Consider whether you want to watch it. So this could have something to do with it. This is going to be this is actually called a Holocaust, because the city was blown up in flames, right? And even the ground, it's very interesting. You find this well, here in the Bible, but also in Midrash, that when people are evil, even nature suffers. Even nature suffers. You know, well, obviously the flood, right? It wasn't just the living creatures, it was the whole world of nature. And even after Cain killed Abel, there is a midrash that said that once there were many different kinds of fruit growing on a single tree, but after Cain killed Abel, the trees went into mourning, and from then on, only one kind of fruit grows on a single tree. And only in the Messianic age will different kinds of fruit bear fruit on a single tree. So somehow the rabbis knew that nature is impacted by human activity. Okay, that was an aside. Yes.
This part of the story is part of Lot's story. Before this, the angels were going to visit Lot to give him the fair warning. And people of the town came to his house and said, send out those men. Mm-hmm. And Lot offered his daughter.
Right, nice guy, yes.
Yeah, very sweet guy. So maybe the daughters didn't want to go with Dad, who doesn't make such good decisions on their behalf.
No, very interesting. Yes, so, okay, so those are some insights. What else is missing? There are no women's names. Okay, we don't know Lot's wife's name, but rabbis give her a name. I'm going to get to that in a minute. We don't know the daughters' names, which I have yet to find in any midrashic literature. And the other question that sometimes comes up is, what's the great outcry? It says, because of the great outcry against the Lord, that before the Lord has come so great. What was the outcry? There was an outcry during the flood, right? There was the outcry of the earth, and God brought the flood. So the rabbis decide in a midrash to actually make this a story of a particular outcry. And they, in their imagination, come up with a daughter of Lot and his wife. I don't think I included it in, oh yes, I did. So on the page, the second page, it says, right after Pirkei the Rabbi Eliezer, they made a proclamation. See that? Okay. They made a proclamation, everyone who strengthens, this is the city of Sodom and Gomorrah. The city made a proclamation. Anyone who strengthens the hand of the poor with a loaf of bread shall be burned by fire. Palotit, the daughter of Lot, oh, got a name now, was married to one of the magnates of Sodom. She saw a very poor man in the city. Every day she went to draw water for the poor man and put provisions into her bucket to feed him, secretly, because you're not allowed to do that. The men of Sodom said, how does this poor man live? You know, we don't feed him. Where does he find food? When they learned the facts, they brought Palotit forth to be burned by fire. Her outcry ascended to God. I will go down and see whether they have acted according to her outcry, and if that's the case, I'm going to destroy the city. So, what is the sin of Sodom and Gomorrah? Not the one you think it is, but the one that the rabbis say it is. What do you think the sin of Sodom and Gomorrah is? What has been? They were inhospitable. But that's what the rabbis say. They were inhospitable. They, in fact, they go to great lengths. I mean, you can read midrash after midrash talking about how mean they are to people. And they say they were so mean that they took the fruits off the trees so that the birds would have nothing to eat. And so there were no birds in Sodom. You know, which may say something about our own climate disasters, you know, with bees and everything. But basically, they didn't want anybody to take anything. And they had all kinds of torture devices to torture people who came, who were strangers. Anyway, it was in hospitality, yes.
Where's the notion that they were homosexual?
Yes,
Come
where
from?
is it? Augustine.
So it doesn't exist pre-Augustine?
There's no reference to it in the rabbinic literature at
Term
all.
Sodomite is
It is.
still...
But in the
In
fourth, no, you're absolutely right, and I was pretty stunned by this too. But Augustine, in the 4th, 5th century, he coined the notion that this was a sexual sin. Sodomy did not appear until the 4th century, 395. You all are looking at me like I made this up. No, not true. This is when it came about. There were, I mean, if you want the details, letters between Saint Jerome and the priest Amadus, and Augustine regarded homosexuality as a sin, and this is the new motif of the sin that becomes predominant. The rabbis didn't make mention of this. They only made mention of the lack of hospitality in contradiction to Abraham, right? When the angels, what happened? The angels came to Abraham's tent and immediately says, Sarah, go make a dinner. No, I mean, but he welcomes them in even though he is sitting outside in the sun of the day because he just was circumcised. So, you know, he isn't like, this is not my best time. Please don't come and bother me. Come back tomorrow. I'll feel a little better. No, hospitality was a value and a signature of Abraham, and Sodom and Gomorrah was just the opposite. Yes?
Sorry, I don't have the text in front of me, but my recollection is when the townspeople go to Lot's house and say, we want
right, that's exactly right.
Because we want to have our way with them or something like that. So how did the rabbis address that? Because that to me seemed like a clear connection. So how did the rabbis talk about that?
The only thing they talk about that I know of is that they blame Lot, his wife, for going out to her neighbors and asking for salt. Meaning, you know, they're having guests and they need salt to cook the meal. And Lot's wife says, I don't have any salt. He says, well, how could you not have, I mean, I don't know what happened, but how could you not have salt? So she goes out to the neighbors. And by going out to the neighbors asking for salt, she let the community know that they had guests. Having guests, you don't have guests in Sodom. Okay, you don't have guests in Sodom. And so why did she turn to a pillar of salt? This particular midrash says because she sinned with salt. Okay, that's the other alternative. Yes.
Another question that comes to my mind is the sentence, he seemed to his son-in-law as one who jests. What would make the son-in-law think that God was jesting?
God didn't talk to the son-in-laws. God only talked to Lot. And Lot says, hey, I got some angels here, and they're telling me they're going to destroy this whole city. And they said, you got to be kidding. I mean, really? I mean, how many? What's the story about Noah's flood? He was building that for years, the ark. And the idea was to take a long time to build so the people would finally recognize that there is going to be a flood and they'll change their ways. But lo and behold, the people were so bad and so stubborn, they never paid attention. They thought Noah was crazy. It's the same story in the sense that people who tell you the world's going to end tomorrow, they're nuts. We don't pay attention to them. We don't believe them. Okay, so that's where we are. So the story is hospitality, which becomes so important in Judaism, and you can find lots of references to it. So now I'm going to skip the messianic rumblings because I want to go, what happens to Lot afterwards, just very briefly, is he escapes. He ends up in Zoar. He gets a place to escape. He can't go that far. He's with his two daughters, and the daughters think this is the end of the world. I mean, why should they think anything else? You know, no text messages, no internet, no phones. The world has ended because what they just saw was a disaster. They said, well, we don't want the world to end, so we're going to get our father drunk, have sex with him, and have children, so there will be a world. And you're all looking like, well, that's incest, and that's bad. But somehow, according to this particular test, it doesn't seem bad. And what happens? Who is born of the daughter's relationship with the father? The Moabites and the Ammonites. Moab. And who was a Moabite? Ruth. Hey, you're good. Ruth. And who is Ruth the ancestress of? David. And who is David the promise comes to? David, who is supposed to come from King David? So from the act of the daughters in the cave is the Messiah. So it's very bizarre, right? Because you would think that this act would not be looked upon favorably, but the way it's told is very interesting. And some even say the wine in the cave, like how come there was wine in the cave? Really, all of a sudden, wine in the cave was a sign from God that this is what you should be doing. So that's a little aside, very interesting. Okay, so now let's go to the, my pages are slightly different than yours. After the messianic rumblings, page 3, why did she become a pillar of salt? Okay, the first few pieces here are the more traditional interpretation that you find from the rabbis, and it's negative. Like the first one, the angels, it was Lot who decided to bring them into the house because he was so righteous. So Lot gets a favorable treatment, his wife doesn't. So Lot wanted the members of his house to participate in the act of hospitality, just like Abraham, and he asked his wife to bring salt. And don't you want, she says this is a terrible thing, and she complies, and just like I told you, they went out, and she went out to collect salt, and then everybody knew they had guests, and that's how she was eventually punished, through the salt that she announced to the neighbors. And then you can find even like on 4, where it says, the pillar of salt was left by God as a memorial for all time. Moses saw the pillar of Lot's wife when God showed him all the land of Canaan before his death. Lot's wife stands in her place to the present every day, passing oxen lick her feet, and every morning she rises again to her previous shape as a pillar of salt. Okay, an eternal memorial to women's disobedience. Okay, but now, lo and behold, we have a positive view. She has a name, and this is the best part, and she turned out of compassion. What's her name? Edith. And why is this so amazing? Because the word Edith comes from the word aid, which means witness. Wow. She is the only one to bear witness to what happened at Sodom and Gomorrah. And you have to think about it. Look, the city was obviously not a great city. It was wicked. There are a lot of bad things that happened. But there were babies. There were pregnant women. There were toddlers. This was her home. There were her son-in-laws and 2 of her daughters. And if you want to add the midrash, there was a daughter who was buried there. So she bore witness. And, okay, let's follow this a little bit further. So 2 married daughters and their husbands remained in the city, as did the future sons-in-laws of the daughters that left, okay, because they didn't come with them. The compassion of Edith, this is from a midrash here. The compassion of Edith, the wife of Lot, was stirred for her daughters who were married in Sodom, and she looked back behind her to see if they were coming after her or not. And what did she see? The Shekhinah, the indwelling presence of God. So you could say you can't see God's face and live, and that's what happened, but let's go a little further. Adi comes from the word meaning witness. Now, what root is of the word Shekhinah? If you're looking on point 2, Shachin. And what does that mean? She looked back and saw her neighbor. She turns around and sees her neighbor. And as I would tell it, she dissolves in tears, in grief. And she can't move further. And so one of the questions we can ask here, and I'm going to talk a little bit more about the tears and the grieving. You've got 2 poles. You've got Lot, who says, I'm not looking. I cannot look at this. That's what they told me, not to look at it. It's going to be too horrendous. I'm just going on. I've got daughters behind me, but I don't care. I'm going on. So you have the one who will not look. And then you have Lot's wife, Edith, who looks. And neither of those poles yield the most positive result. So the question I ask, I always favored Lot's wife. When I first told this story, I said, oh, she bore witness. We all should bear witness. She was crying. This was the right thing to do. And then I said, no, what's the problem? She can't move on. How can you bear witness to horrendous tragedy and still turn around and create a love? How can you weep and grieve and remember and still create. And where is the place, and I don't have an answer to this, this is the question, but where is the place between remembering and forgetting? So, I mean, we can go back to the Holocaust. I mean, I know my grandparents, nothing, never told me a thing. I have no idea. I mean, they actually left before the Holocaust, but they lost family in the Holocaust. Not a word. They would not bear witness, and they would never talk about it. And I was too young to know to ask. And then people who are so consumed in the bearing of the witness that they're not able to live a life today. So where's the place? And we can think of it in a more contemporary way with Israel, right? We are bearing witness, not directly, because we're not there, to the terrible massacres that happened on October 7th. And there's graphic material to see what went on. And we're also bearing witness to civilians dying in Gaza and soldiers dying in Israel. And we're bearing witness, and what do we do with that? Do we speak out? If we speak out, how do we speak out? Where is the compassion? Where is the place between remembering and forgetting? And is it sometimes okay to forget? So I want to go on. I'm just posing those out there for thinking. So this idea of tears and women is very connected. There was a category of skilled women who were weepers. And here's a reference I have at the bottom, which says, weeping women, it's from Jeremiah. Send for the skilled women. And what are they skilled at? Let them quickly start a wailing for us, that our eyes may run with tears and our pupils flow with water. For the sound of wailing is heard in Zion. We are despoiled. How greatly we are ashamed. We must leave our land, abandon our dwellings. Hear, O women, the word. We need somebody to help us grieve. And we have to grieve. We can't do what Lot did. We can't turn away and just go on like nothing ever happened. So these women have a role in grieving. And there is, in many cultures, women, like particularly during funerals, would follow funeral processions, and they would be designated as weepers. That was their job. And then there's an interesting reference, and I just read this lately, and it's fascinating me. There's a reference in Psalms that says, it's in reference to God. It says, you have collected all my tears in your bottle. And I said, wow, a bottle of tears. And then I found this reference from an author who's written a lot about mourning. And she writes this, you don't have this. So, in a cabinet in my synagogue's foyer is a small glass bottle with 2 openings. It is an object from around 100 CE. Which caught and held the tears of those who mourn the destruction of the temple. According to legend, it was believed that the Messiah would come when the bottle was filled. So this notion, oh, and does anybody know who, where was the first tear in the Bible? The first tear in the Bible was Adam and Eve. Because when God, according to Midrash, okay, look, all this is in your imagination, okay? According to Midrash, when God sent Adam and Eve out of the garden because they had eaten from the tree of knowledge of good and evil, God said, I'll give you a gift. I'm going to give you the gift of a tear. So that when you are overwhelmed and saddened by what happens in life, you will be able to cry, and that will give you release. So there was like this positive notion of weeping that is necessary. I mean, that's what Judaism says. You know, there's a period of mourning. There's a period when you should be crying. You should not try. You walk through the valley of shadows, right? You don't jump over it. You don't walk around it. And that's I just never heard of this bottle of tears. I think that's so fascinating. Yes?
How can
Oh, you need the microphone, sorry.
I don't want to interrupt your logic, but
That's not logic, no logic here.
my wife and I have been debating for 50 years about Midrash. My interpretation of Midrash is that the rabbis are confronted with ignorance, and they feel they conjure up. But and so when Suzanne says this is a midrash, I say, but what does Torah say?
What is who?
What does Torah say?
Oh, it's-
Torah say? The Torah is the basic document, and midrash is that I see midrash as society changes. You know, the Torah is written at a time when the Hebrews were shepherds. Were mostly shepherds, and the rabbinical period is a period when society has become more complex, when the Hebrews are part of a Hellenic and then a Roman world. They're not isolated anymore, and the rabbis have to.
Yeah, so
So
look,
how would you answer me?
I said, you're not living by Torah. You are living by the way the rabbis interpreted the Torah, and then subsequent generations. I give you a very good example of this. Okay, do you all light candles on Friday night? Not in the Torah. In the Torah, it says you shouldn't light a fire on Shabbat, right? And then along came, so there, you know, in the early rabbinic period, you have these different groups, the Sadducees who were like the priests, and the Pharisees who were the ancestors of the rabbis. And the Pharisees said, this is terrible. He says, Shabbat is a day of delight. I mean, they didn't have electric lights they could turn on and keep on. They had to light candles. So they said, this is terrible. We are going to light candles before the Shabbat. We're going to light candles on Shabbat because it should be a day of light. The Sadducees said you do not light candles on Shabbat because it says don't light a fire. Who won? The Pharisees won, and we light candles. But I'll tell you how we got it in. Because don't you realize normally you say a blessing and then you do the act, right? So you say hamotzi, you eat the challah. That's not what you do with the candles. Why? If you said the blessing, it's Shabbat. You can't light a candle. So you light the candles and then cover your eyes and you say the blessing, go, oh, look at that, the candles. So it's sort of like you create this sort of fiction. And that didn't convince everybody. It says in the Torah that you should sit in the dark. They said, okay, the rabbi said, we'll tell women that they have to light the candles, and if they don't, they'll have pain in childbirth. And so we have candle lighting. And pain in child, well, you know, but I mean, so this is how it works. And we don't live by Torah. We live by, but this material is not something we live by in terms of laws. It's the rabbinic imagination saying, maybe it's telling us a narrative, a story that's saying there is a place for grief and there is a place to bear witness, and they're giving us lessons, okay? They're giving us lessons. And there's another piece of this lesson which is so interesting. In another midrash, it says to God, put my tears in your bottle, accept my tears like you accepted the tears of Hagar. So imagine this. This is incredible imagination. It's not just the tears of the Jewish people. It's the tears of Hagar who was sent out into the wilderness. You have this sympathy for two peoples. I just think it's incredible that there was a heart that could hold the tears of two people. And maybe, that's what we're asking of ourselves. I mean, there was a flask for Hagar's tears. Okay. So you have to use your imagination for this. Oh, so also, the same thing of holding two people's pain. The shofar. What's the sound of the shofar according to rabbinic midrash? The sound of the shofar were the cries of two mothers. Who? Sarah, when she heard that Abraham had taken her only son up to the mountain to sacrifice him, she let an outcry, and that's the sound of the shofar. And the other, less known, is the mother of Israel's enemy, Sisera, who was killed, and you heard her crying. So the sound of the shofar is our mother, the weeping of our outcry of our mother, and the outcrying of the mother of our enemy. I mean, that's incredible. Do you agree? I mean, it's just like, why would you do that? Why care about the enemy? No, but it's just really embedded in the tradition. Okay, yes, there's a question in the back.
We had one here also. Mitch.
Oh, okay, I couldn't see that.
Okay. Just a first observation is the last question came from a professor of African history who knows very well how stories shape culture.
There you go, yes.
And about the whole story, this I kind of think of as kind of epitropaic. There's a pillar of salt.
That's right.
Why is there a pillar of salt? So we had to make up a story. Somebody made up this story. Somebody wrote this story. Somebody made up this story. And I find it, I think your interpretations and the thinking about how this story was told and about whom it was told are so indicative of what kinds of stories people needed to make up and how their stories shaped, how they shaped their stories and how their stories shaped them.
Exactly. I mean, exactly. And we're going to add to this story. I mean, I'm not saying now, but I'm going to show you how some artists have added to this story because we live at a different time. Okay? And we have to bring our lives into the text. That's why Judaism survived, because it was so flexible. It was so open to stories continuing to be told and including our experiences in the narrative. Okay, there was another question, yes.
Yeah, I just want to go back quickly to something you said about we're not living Torah, we're living Mishnah. I think I interpret.
Well, living
right.
the way the rabbis
Right.
interpreted the
Right.
Torah, yeah.
So my question is, where does the foundation of our sense of our moral foundation, our sense of ethics and justice, is that from Torah, or also are we the victims of the rabbis?
The victims.
I use that in the
Yeah,
most
you're
pleasant
both.
way.
Look, what is it? I'll give you an very simple example. What's the an eye for an eye, a tooth for a tooth? Okay. In the Torah, that was an advance. Because if somebody took out your eye, you could go kill his whole family. I mean, that's how justice worked. You did this to me, I'm going to go do terrible things to you. The rabbi says, the Torah says, no, you can't do that. If it's an eye, you only get an eye. Okay, this is not literal, okay. So, and then the rabbis come along and say, no, it doesn't mean that. It means monetary compensation. So so the morality continues to develop, right? As our understanding of right and wrong in our communities continue to develop. So you're doing both. Okay, one of the things I found so fascinating about this, and I don't know how much time we have, but you've got to look at this. The artist tells a story and calls it Lot's wife. You just have to see some of these. So this is one of my artists that I really like a lot. His name is Anselm Kiefer, a German artist. Does a lot, he's not Jewish, he does a lot of large works about the Holocaust, if any of you know him. I'm not going to say anything. Tell me, it's called Lot's Wife. What do you think it's about? I mean, look, it's not as good as it is if you look at it online or in person, but what is it? Why does he call it Lot's wife? I don't see anybody here. I'm sorry. Yeah, the train, notice how the train, it's kind of like a visual midrash, right? You've talked about, I think, Tina, visual midrash. The train tracks to the crematoria, and they meet at a vanishing point, and that was the vanishing point for 6 million Jews. There is, you can't tell, but you see the whitewash on the back? That is salt. It's a whitewash of salt. And you also can't see this too well, but there's a metal heating coil that's attached to the painting, which is a symbol of the crematoria. So they created the sky by pouring a salt solution on a sheet of lead. And so he's saying, we're looking back, not to Sodom and Gomorrah. What do we look back when he was doing this, 1989? Look back to the Holocaust. And there's I'll read you this quote from somebody who interpreted this painting. "It is in the interest of the powerful in any society," referencing the Nazis here, "to ensure that we focus on the present and the future and don't look back at the past, its terrors and crime. But we must look back. We must dare the pillar of salt. We must dare the pillar of salt, the wrath of authority and the punishment it inflicts. For unless we look back, we cannot live in truth. We will be exiled to the state of historical amnesia." Okay, and unfortunately, we've got a lot of people with historical amnesia, right? So we have to look back. So I was once with Dennis, we were in Prague studying with a liberal synagogue there one evening, and I told this story of Lot's wife, and this elderly man got up and said, "I was once a pillar of salt." And then he paused and he said, "I was sent to Auschwitz with my parents were sent one way, I was sent the other. I turned around and saw the smoke, and I became a pillar of salt." The power of Midrash is that it still speaks to us. Okay, that it still speaks to us. And just recently, actually, my son was interviewing a woman from one of the kibbutzim who had been attacked on October 7th. And he wanted to ask her more about what happened. And she didn't want to talk about it, but she said, "I saw worse than Sodom. I saw worse than Sodom." So this story, which we don't often pay much attention to, has such incredible power because it asks us to face the worst of humanity. And then how do we respond? Let's just look about, I just want to show you a few other pictures and then we can talk a little further. So this was done in 1948. It's called Lot's Wife. What do you think? Who's looking back at what? I'm sorry, this is the picture, this one. The one with the angel and the beheaded person. You see that one?
Benton Murdoch.
Huh? Oh, yes, Benton Murdoch Spurance. What's 1948? Any thoughts? You see the cloud in the back on the right-hand side? Yeah, it's supposed to be a cloud. It's supposed to be an atomic bomb. Maybe in the original, it looks more powerful. But, and, you know, the bomb and what happened at Nagasaki and Hiroshima and, you know, the disaster that took place, this is like an after World War II film. And looking back at what disaster was caused. And it doesn't turn to a pillar of salt, but, you know, destroyed by all that took place. So the question, one has to ask the question of why she looked back. And there are many ways of considering that. She looked back out of regret, that she couldn't change the city, you know. She looked out of fear. Her daughters were left behind. She looked back at shame. How come she gets to escape and her neighbor didn't? I mean, how many people always said, you know, I feel guilty, I got out and they didn't, I didn't deserve it, out of shame. Out of anger, could she have been angry at God? Why did he have to destroy the cities? It was okay, you know, he could have a conversation with Abraham, you know, if you find 10 people, then I won't destroy. He said, why couldn't he have a conversation, or God have a conversation with Lot's wife? Maybe she had a question. And then, of course, the last possibility, she looked back out of compassion. Yes?
It just seems to me that the question, why did she look back, is only one possible question here. Why did the angels command Lot not to look back? The natural thing is to look back.
Yeah, interesting. Why do you think?
You know, it's sort of saying God is destroying things.
God is what?
God is destroying things.
Right.
So, you know, the narrative of the Bible is that, you know, God is doing good things for the Jewish people. And so, yeah, don't look back to see how horrible it is, right? Because it's good for the Jewish people.
There weren't any Jews, though. I mean, okay.
The answer.
Right, there were Hebrews, right? But that's interesting that we shouldn't look at the suffering of other people. That would be, I don't know how that feels spiritually. Okay, that's an interesting thing to consider. Behind you, there's also a question.
It also looks like, in looking back, she lost her head.
In this one, yes, I think it has to do with the radiation of the bombs in this particular case. It's a different story that you look back. And it's interesting, here the angel's female. In our story, the angels are not female. And also there's another interesting midrash. This takes us a little bit far afield, but according to one midrash, the angels weren't supposed to tell Lot. And they were made, because they did warn Lot, they were made to, it's really used, it's a big imagination. They were made to stay in the land until they get to go back up to heaven. And when is that? Jacob's ladder. Do you remember because they're trying to figure out why in Jacob's ladder the angels are going up and then down, because you would assume angels are coming from the heavens, and God says, well, these angels finally got to go back up. I don't know, that's just funny how the rabbis try to get everything to work. Yeah. Yeah.
Sid, I've got the mic here.
You stand up because you're under a speaker.
I'm wondering how you wrestle with the theology of all this, of a God who would wreak such destruction and doesn't want witnesses and doesn't want historical record or remembrance. How do you wrestle with them?
Thank you for that question. I wanted to go there at some point. Okay, to me, this is just a fantastic piece of storytelling. Okay, for me, I think it's possible for a community to be so depraved and so evil and so unkind and cruel that they can destroy themselves. And that's why the midrashim on hospitality really resonated with me. You know, like when we keep, I'm talking from the United States, I don't know where your issues are here, but you know, constantly with refugees and walls and we don't like these people and keep people, you can destroy yourselves. And the environment. I've never noticed that before, but the notion that all the time there are these major destructions, there is also nature destruction. I think that people can be so horrendous that they can destroy themselves. Nobody wants to say that, so, oh, well, it was God. You know, I don't think it had to do with an outside force. I said it had to do with an internal force. Then the question is, what do we do with that? Knowing this, what do we do with it? Do we ignore it? You know, do we not look? Do we try to forget what we did? Do we remember? Does it keep us from moving on? You know, these are all the questions I think we have to deal with today as we bear witness more than our ancestors did because we see it on TV. You can't, I mean, actually, we were watching so much TV after October 7th on the news, and actually it was, Dennis, you've got to turn this off. I mean, you can't go on. You're so presented with this day in and day out, but that you're constantly bearing witness all the time. And then you have to decide whether what you're seeing is news or propaganda, but that's another story. Okay, look, yeah, I'm sorry, Tina.
No, I just would like to, place the fact that we're not supposed to do something doesn't mean we shouldn't do something. So, I mean, we certainly have precedents of that tradition. In the Garden of Eden, it's very clearly, it says don't eat from the tree. But we meant to eat from the tree because you can't live in a garden. We meant to populate the earth. So inherent in the text is actually disobedience. As if the one who's walking in the garden sort of, looks and says, really? That's it? You're just going to walk around and eat these lovely fruits and, this is a spa in Bahamas and this is enough for you? Like, think a little bit, think. So once you right? So I'm not sure that the text meant for her truly not to look back.
Very good. That's so interesting. Yes, because they really wanted you to eat from the tree of knowledge of good and evil, or been humanity. Let me show you another picture, and I just want to share a couple poems if we have a few minutes. Here's this picture, 2008, a bit more contemporary. I believe it's South African. Yes, South African artists. The one of the lady turning around, Diane Victor. She also all these are called Lot's wife. Okay. What's happening here? It's a totally different story of Lot's wife, right? She has to leave her home. She's forced migration, forced into exile. The father and two of the kids obviously are on their way. And she, carrying the baby on her back and with baggage, looks back at her home. And so this becomes an image of thousands of refugees who have to leave their home because of terrorism and war. And just think, what do we think of ourselves? I mean, what would you do? Would you look back at the place? I mean, even though the people were terrible, you still built a home there. Say you still have your photographs, you still have your mom's teapot and your candlesticks, and you couldn't carry them, and you look back. So would you, even as you have to leave and you can't remain, there's still some nostalgia for home. Yes, you were.
I was fortunate to know my great-grandparents.
Wait.
Pause for a moment.
I was fortunate to know my great-grandparents. I was fortunate to know my great-grandparents who left Russia, Ukraine before the revolution. And there were pogroms even then. And when I told my great-grandmother that my new husband and I were going to take a trip to Europe, she said, "Feh, I ran away from there." And she didn't have any good reminiscences. She didn't have any nice stories about how good life was before the pogroms. She just didn't want to think about it ever. So I couldn't show her any postcards or anything of my trips because it would have made her really sour.
So I think there is this feeling sometimes I don't want to look at it because it brings back bad memories. Yeah, Phyllis.
I just was noticing in the picture, the Diane Victor, that the father is looking one way, but he's covering the face of his child on the other side.
Yeah, don't see.
And there are these faces, like in the painting, like under his child's body.
Okay, I
And-
didn't even see that. Look.
On his back, the shadow sort of on his back. And I saw another one in the sky, like to the left of the woman's, what she's carrying on her head. And there's probably others that I can't see, but I just was noticing that.
Wow, that's
I
pretty.
have no answer. I just.
No, I love it. I didn't see it.
And the father is looking at you.
He's looking at, yeah, not totally back, but to the side. So let me read you this quote. I think this is so powerful. I don't want to leave without this one. This is by Susan Sontag. Remembering is an ethical act, has ethical value in and of itself. Memory is achingly the only relation we can have with the dead. So the belief that remembering is an ethical act is deep in our nature as humans. We know we are going to die and who mourn those who the normal course of things die before us, grandparents, parents, teachers, older friends. Heartlessness and amnesia seem to go together. But history gives contradictory signals about the value of remembering in the world, remembering in much longer span of collective history. There is simply too much injustice in the world, and too much remembering embitters. To make peace is to forget. To reconcile, it is necessary memory be faulty and limited. So I just present that as a way of looking at things, you know. Is that true? You know, is that true? There's a danger to forgetting because we repeat the past and we repress it and, you know, ultimately comes up in other ways even though we don't want it to. And there's a danger to too much remembering because we become so embittered that we can't live a good life. So that's the question. How do we remember in a way that is healing and transforms acts of destruction into acts of creation? That's the question that we all have to struggle with. Okay, I know we're getting really late. There's another picture just to show you that I don't understand this picture, but I find it fascinating. You don't see a picture of Lot's wife. According to this painting, Marvin Hayes, 1939, he shows us her face. And you could talk about what you see in this face. You know, what is she? Sad, curious, anxious, regretful. And I have yet to find an answer as to why there is the big hand there. I've asked artists, I've looked up on the internet, nobody knows. So why this hand? Is it her hand? Is it another hand? Is it the angel's, the God's hand? I don't know. But it just, so no one's ever seen her face. And here it is. The other pieces what was I going to say here? So the other pieces are all poetry. I don't know that we have time to get to them, but I do have to tell you, since Kurt Vonnegut was born in Indiana, that Kurt Vonnegut in Slaughterhouse 5 wrote about Lot's wife, and he said, and Lot's wife, of course, this is, I have it on one of your sheets, of course, was not to look back where all those people and their homes had been, but she did look back, and I love her for that because it was so human. So she turns into a pillar of salt. So it goes. And what is Slaughterhouse 5 about? Looking back on the destruction of Dresden. And he basically says nobody wanted to see it. And so like Lot's wife, this book is looking back. Looking back. And then you're welcome. Yeah, was there a question?
Not a question, it's the hand.
Yes, what?
The way I see it is
Aggie?
sometimes we use our hand to cover our view in front of us. And here he's showing, or the painter, is it a he? Yeah.
And it's an
He's
ex-
showing that she didn't want to look back, but then she raised her hand and she
Interesting.
saw it.
Yeah, like it's sort of shielding, like not sure what to do. That's very good. Just a word about salt. So salt is a very powerful image and item, particularly in the Middle East at that time. I mean, it had two qualities to it, right? It could destroy, you know, when you salt the land and nothing can grow on it. It can corrode. things. On the other hand, it was a preservative, right? And you know the phrase, to be worth one's salt? That means that you're worth your salt. You have merit because salt was important. And it even says a couple times in the Bible, the covenant of salt. So just she turned into a preservative. It's not necessarily a negative because salt is a, what? Salary, actually, yes, salary comes from the word salt.
So salt is one of the most important items of early trade, because if you didn't have salt, your body needed salt.
Right.
And so salt, we think of salt as something, 89 cents, we get a
It's
container.
bad for your blood pressure.
Yeah, and also bad for you. But I know only Africa, but salt is craved. It was salt and iron were the most important items of early trade. I just want to say one final thing. I've done research on oral tradition, and I look at scripture in some ways, the way I look at oral tradition. That is, I try to figure out, not always successfully, why these things are there. Why, you know, the Quran is one book. The Torah is 5. Why do these people preserve this particular, not just the whole thing, but a particular memory? I try to figure out, often unsuccessfully, why they keep it. Why do they want to keep this memory? And that's a fascinating.
Yeah, I mean, it's
I
very
love it.
fascinating. Look, I know people have to leave because I see you are leaving. So it's a good enough evidence. I leave with you also, the poetry is very compelling. And you'll understand it. The one by Anna Akhmatova is a Russian who didn't want to leave Russia, so that you might find that interesting. Yeah, and so that's interesting. The others are ones. Deborah Paredes is a Latino poet, and you'll get a sense of what they are trying to say. You don't need me to interpret it, but I wanted to share it with you. There's one more comment. Should we?
Just going to say that your Devar Torah here will be preserved.
Oh, thank you. Well, just be careful when you turn around, that's all.
Could we just, yeah.
Thank you.
So,
You know, there are salt and pepper shakers of Lot's wife, and she's, I mean, there's so many funny pictures about it. But I think it's a compelling story. I really do. And I'm actually working with a photographer now, a Jewish photographer, to see if she can make photographs that respond to this story. So we'll see what happens.
So,
There's, yeah. Oh, you guys are too much.
how clever. So I just want to thank, of course, Rabbi Sandy and Rabbi Dennis, who have given us so much this morning. And you can tell the pleasure of learning and the riches we have and share. So we will allow our guests to rest. Please get home safe, have a bit of a shluf, and then come back vibrant and perky tomorrow night for a lecture. And it is
7:30.
Thank you, 7:30, and there will be light dessert afterwards on paper plates. So that's what I need to tell you.
If you want, there is a cello opera called Lot's Wife by Maya Beiser, an Israeli, but who lives here. That's absolutely incredible. So I didn't have a chance to tell you about it. You can look it up online, Maya Beiser.